Welcome to Cat Has Questions, curiosity, stories, and the strange corners of everyday life. Hello. I'm Kat, and this is Cat Has Questions. So today I've got another infamous unsolved case. My poor husband was saying the other day how frustrating the unsolved ones are to listen to. But I'm like, it's kind of the point. But I do have to give him a shout out because I'm doing all like the recording, editing, etc. on my own. But my husband was like, yeah, I can help with some of the editing. Apparently, I'm just like a very heavy breather and a big mouth noise maker. And he goes in and like cuts them all out. And each week I'm like, okay, it's time to edit the podcast. And he's like, ugh. And I tell him like, you do not have to do this. And he's like, no, because I know you won't do it, and I cannot listen to your podcast then because your mouth. So he knows me too well because I would definitely not take my mouth smacks out. So thanks for the free producing, Jake. But let's get into today's unsolved story. 3 women vanished from the same house overnight in 1992. No signs of forced entry, no clear struggle. Their cars were still in the driveway, their purses still inside. It looked like they had just stepped out for a moment, except they never came back. I don't know why, but cases like this always stay with me more than anything else. The ones where everything feels normal, because it's easy to imagine yourself there. A normal night, plans the next day, you leave your things exactly where you expect to come back to them. And then something interrupts that moment quietly and quickly, and everything just stops. No warning, no time to react, just gone. This is the case of the Springfield 3. So let's start at the beginning. Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt was born November 1st, 1944. She was 47 years old at the time of this story taking place. She was a cosmetologist at a local Springfield, Missouri salon, and by most accounts, well-liked, social, and close with her clients and friends. Friends described her as warm and dependable, not someone who would vanish without contacting someone. She had been married twice before and was divorced. Her first husband was Brent Streeter, who was also her daughter's father, Suzanne Susie Streeter. By 1992, Cheryl was divorced from her second husband, Don Levitt, which is where the last name Levitt comes from for her. In 1992, she was essentially a single mother living with her daughter Susie, and by all accounts, she did not have much contact at all with her ex-husbands. She and Susie had only recently moved into the East Delmar house in Springfield, about 2 months before this disappearance. She had been fixing up and decorating the house, including furniture projects and painting. In fact, the last confirmed call from Cheryl was around 11:15 p.m. on June 6th when she was talking to a friend about painting or like varnishing a chest of drawers in her bedroom. Now, Cheryl's relationship with Susie was very good. They were very close. She was involved in Susie's life and knew all of her friends. She was not someone who would just like disappear. She would not leave Susie, her work, or her responsibilities behind. So it's June 6th, 1992, graduation night in Springfield, Missouri. 2 friends, Susie, so Cheryl's daughter, and Stacy McCall, have just finished high school. They're 18 and 19. The night is supposed to be simple. Celebrations, staying out late, spending time with friends, typical high school girl activities. Susie and Stacy graduated from Kickapoo High School at 4 p.m. on June 6th, 1992. Cheryl, Susie's mom, attended to witness her daughter's graduation. Both Susie and Stacy were last seen around 2 a.m. on June 7th while leaving the last of the few graduation parties they had attended that evening, so they were kind of hopping around. But I'm going to get into the timeline. After graduation, the school provided an alcohol-free lock-in inside the building until 8 a.m. on June 7th. Susie and Stacy declined and instead planned to later meet up at their friend's house, Janelle Kirby, for a party at their neighbor's, kind of after they all finished dinner up at home with their own families. So all of them having dinner with their own families, and then these 3 girls were going to meet up later and go to some graduation parties. After having photographs taken with her graduation cake and receiving a Cocker Spaniel puppy as a graduation present, Stacy departed for the Kirby residence, so Janelle's house. Susie took photographs that evening at her house, at the Delmar residence, with her friend Nigel Kenny, before departing to Janelle's house as well. A quote from Janelle's mom: "If Cheryl Levitt wanted to get a hold of her daughter, Susie, she knew exactly where to call," says Kathy Kirby. "We had told her to call us if she needed to get a hold of Susie. Our phone did not ring one time." It sounds like Susie, Stacy, and Janelle were just kind of jumping around that night on June 6th, making plans for the evening and the following day. Following the party that they were going to at Janelle's house, or, Janelle's neighbor's house, the trio, Susie, Stacy, and Janelle, planned to drive to a Branson motel, spend the night, and connect with friends the next morning at a water park called Whitewater. Stacy's mother, Janice, advised against driving that night with fear of a car accident due to alcohol. Susie promised to call Nigel Kenny the morning of June 7th so that they could all meet at Whitewater. And Stacy also promised to call her mother. Once Stacy and Susie arrived at the Kirby residence, they began partying with Janelle Kirby's neighbors in Battlefield before changing plans and carpooling to another party in Springfield. So it feels like they're hopping around, but I feel like this is like very typical teenage behavior. They're just seeing where their friends are, hopping around to different parties, and it's the day of graduation. So they're all excited, probably wanting to see all of their friends. At roughly 10 p.m., Stacy McCall called her mother, Janice, with another change of plans. She said, "Mom, don't worry. We're not going to Branson tonight." So since her mom was worried about them driving, if they had been drinking or anything like that, and it's just late anyways. So Janice stated that the new plan that was made was with the understanding that they would all meet at between 8 and 8:30 the next morning. Everyone would get together to go to that Whitewater water park. Their last party at the residence of Stacy's friend's house, Michelle Elder, was broken up by the Springfield police around 1:50 a.m. before the three girls returned to Janelle's house in Battlefield around 2 a.m. The girls planned to spend the night at Janelle's house, but after realizing her house was too crowded with out-of-town relatives for her graduation, Susie and Stacy then just decided to go back to Susie and Cheryl's house at 1717 East Delmar for the night. Susie had just gotten a king-size waterbed and was so excited to show Stacy. That is like the most 90s thing I have ever heard. But the other thing too is Cheryl Levitt, so Susie's mom, was last heard from at approximately 11:15 p.m. on June 6th when she had spoke with a friend on the phone about, like I said, painting that something in her bedroom. So Cheryl was last talked to at 11:15. The young girls left this last party at about 2 a.m. to head back to Susie's house. Janelle's mother, Kathy, told Springfield police she overheard Susie and Stacy talking about the bed when they were leaving the house. So Susie allegedly told Stacy, "Follow me to my house," which Stacy replied, "Okay, I will." And it is assumed they arrived at the Delmar residence because their clothing, jewelry, purses, and vehicles were all present there the next day. There were also used makeup wipes found in the bathroom trash can, assumedly from the girls after returning. So like coming there, they're getting ready to go to sleep, they take their makeup off. 3 people, Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. 1 house. It's the end of a long, normal day. Nothing about any of these decisions stand out in the moment. But later, it's one of the only decisions anyone can point to at all. The next morning on June 7th, 1992, Janelle and her boyfriend Mike Henson visited the house after Susie and Stacy failed to show up for their planned trip to the Whitewater water park. They were supposed to meet at Janelle's house to go, like I mentioned. "I started getting worried because Stacy, she's so responsible, and so is Susie," said Janelle. "I know they wouldn't just take off without telling us they weren't going to Whitewater." Upon arrival, Janelle found the home's front door unlocked, so she entered. But she found no signs of Susie, her mother, or Stacy. Each of the women's cars were parked outside, but she also reported to police that the glass lampshade on the porch light was shattered, though the light bulb was still intact. Mike, Janelle's boyfriend, innocently helped her sweep up the broken glass off the front porch, which police later determined may, unfortunately, have destroyed some potential evidence. Mike stated he did this because Janelle was barefooted And also, like, to be fair, he was just doing a nice thing, thinking like, oh, I'll help them clean this up. This is broken. We don't want people to step on it, whatever. No one at this point also knows anything is wrong. So, like, he's just being helpful. Nigel Kenny, a coworker and close friend of Susie's, there is like potential speculation of him being like a boyfriend or something like that, stated she was a creature of habit and very particular about parking her vehicle in the same spot of the resident's driveway. Nigel believes that because Susie's car was not in the carport as usual, someone else could have possibly parked in her spot when she and Stacy arrived before dawn on June 7th. In the house, Janelle found Cheryl and Susie's dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon. Cinnamon appeared agitated. As they were leaving the residence, Janelle answered a strange and disturbing call on their home phone. So their phone started ringing, and it was an unidentified male who made sexual innuendos and just like gross comments, like a creep. She hung up, but immediately received another call of sexual nature and again hung up. The phone calls were jarring, but she remembered Susie complaining about prank calls at the residence since moving in with Cheryl in the spring of 1992. So like she remembers Susie complaining about this and like talking about this. So her understanding was like this would not just be the very first time this happened. According to a Springfield Police Department officer named David Asher, the calls were obscene. The individual would not identify himself. They were using the F word and several other words, and she just hung up the phone, end quote. Janelle described the caller as teenish. So I'm not sure if that just means like they sounded like a young kid or if it was just because of like the nature of the call. But with no sign of Susie or Stacy, Janelle and Mike decided to visit the local water park, Hydroslide, which doesn't exist anymore, in Springfield instead of driving to Branson, the White Water Park, which they were planning to go to. Once again, they weren't necessarily concerned at this point. They're just like, where did they go? Several hours later, Stacy's mother, Janet, also visited the house as her daughter failed to answer her calls. Janice became panicked after they confirmed Susie and Stacy had not been seen there. Inside the Delmar residence, the family dog Cinnamon comes barreling towards her, and the dog was just going crazy, she said, yipping and crying. So that's a little unusual, too, for like the dog to be freaking out like that. She noticed all three women's purses were sitting on the floor of Susie's bedroom. Cheryl's purse still contained cash, which was almost $900 from work at the salon. So doesn't seem like right now they don't even know this, but that they're gone, but doesn't seem like they were, robbed. Janice also saw her daughter's clothing neatly folded from the night before, the only clothes Stacy had in her possession that night. So if they're right there, she's like, what was she wearing then? Janice noticed that Stacy's shirt and underwear were missing, which that makes me think that she probably took her pants off or whatever and was like sleeping in her shirt and underwear, and that's the last thing she was seen wearing, and then whatever happened to them, that's what she had on. Susie and Stacy's recently used makeup wipes were found, along with their jewelry and keys. Cheryl's cigarettes were left inside the house, which was considered unusual by Cheryl's friends and family who described her as a chain smoker. There was also an unfinished can of Coke found in Susie's bedroom. On her headboard was the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss, which this is just like so sad and, like sweet in hindsight. Like, since this is like a classic graduation gift and they just graduated that day, so it's just sad. The lights were off in Susie's room and her television was showing that static or snow, suggesting they had watched a movie that night, but then the TV never got turned off after the movie was finished, which that would be so eerie going into that dead, quiet house and then just having that eerie static on the TV, that being the only noise in there, aside from the dog freaking out. Janice frantically called the police from the home's telephone to report the three women missing. After placing the call, while checking the phone's answering machine, she listened to a, quote, strange message, but it was inadvertently erased, as was common for most voicemails in the 1990s after being played once, which is unfortunate. So then this is also kind of another piece of evidence similar to that light bulb or the light fixture being broken. She accidentally deleted it, or it got deleted somehow after you listened to it. And I do not have information as to what was on that message, her saying it was interesting. Police were also very interested in the call and believed it may have contained a clue. They also did not believe it was connected to the prank calls that Janelle had answered and received earlier that day in the house. So they think it was another phone call that was important somehow, or could have given them a clue. So Stacy's parents contacted police in reference to their daughter's disappearance from Cheryl's home, more than 16 hours after the women were last seen. Other worried friends and family called and visited the house the following day. Police later estimated that the crime scene had been corrupted by at least 10 to 20 people who visited Cheryl Levitt's house and tidied up the residence while the women were missing, including emptying ashtrays and cleaning coffee cups. Which this is also unfortunate because if someone had stopped by that they knew or something and they maybe they smoked cigarettes together or something, they don't have DNA to get from that now. Once again, all of these people are probably just trying to be helpful. They're not sure what they can do to help. So they're oh, when they come back, their house will be nice and clean, that sort of thing. You're not thinking worst case scenario. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed were several people in the yard. The door was open and people were coming and going from inside the house, said Springfield Police Department's Rick Bookout. Upon the officer's arrival, the scene showed no signs of a struggle except for the shattered porch light. Police also noticed Cheryl's bed had looked slept in, and there was an awkwardly bent window blind in the room. So hard to say if it was like that before or if that could have happened somehow that night. All personal property was left behind, including purses, money, cars, driver's license, keys, medicine, cigarettes, and the family dog, Cinnamon, who was most likely the only witness of the women's disappearance. It's not like these women had been planning to up and leave that everybody knew. Cheryl had a doctor's appointment scheduled for the following Monday, and she also was scheduled to work at her hair salon. Stacy was scheduled to work Monday too. Susie was also scheduled to work. So it's none of these women were clearly closing things up to not show up again. They just vanished. At first, nothing feels urgent. The cars are still there, parked right outside. Inside, the house looks normal. Not ransacked, not disturbed. But then the details start to settle in. All three women are gone. If they left, they did not plan to go far. Or plan to be gone long. That's the first assumption. That maybe they stepped out, maybe they went somewhere quickly, and maybe they'd be back any minute. But minutes turned into hours. Because people don't leave like that. Not without their things, not without telling anyone, especially not all three of them. So, nothing is obviously wrong in the house, but there are small things that aren't right either. So we've touched on a lot of these, but the porch light to start. The glass globe covering the porch light had been shattered, and that stands out immediately. Was there a struggle outside? Did something happen at the door? Did someone break the light maybe to make it harder to be seen? Or if they were taking the girls outside, they didn't want other people to see them coming out. But before police ever see it, it's cleaned up. Friends sweep up the broken glass, assuming it's just damage. Something minor, something irrelevant, unrelated. And just like that, one of the potential pieces of evidence is gone. Next is the phone calls. After the women disappeared, and even before, it sounds like from Janelle's account, the house phone was receiving strange calls, sexual and disturbing. At one point, there was a message left on the answering machine that also was unfortunately lost, like we talked about. Because if something happened in that house, maybe that message could have captured something. A voice, a tone, a clue. But the message got erased, and whatever was on it is gone. Another moment where something might have mattered just disappears. And then finally the dog. Cheryl's dog is still inside the house, alive and agitated. So had he seen something? Was he stressed out about what had been going on? Is it just because he had been left alone for so long? It's a small detail, but it matters. Because if something violent had happened, you might expect a lot of chaos. Noise, movement, things kind of strewn around. Panic. But instead, everything feels quiet. Too quiet. At this point, investigators are left with something difficult. Not just a lack of answers, but a lack of direction. There's no forced entry into the house, so maybe the women knew whoever had come to the door. Maybe they let them in. That would explain the lack of disturbance as well. But then you have to ask, why would 3 people disappear without resistance? Why would all 3 go quietly? That assumption starts to break down too, because 1 person maybe, 2 possibly, but 3 at the same time? Without leaving anything behind, without anyone hearing anything. It just doesn't make full sense. Over time, though, a few possibilities start to take shape. One is that the women knew the person responsible, that they opened the door willingly, like we said. Another theory is that it was opportunistic. Someone saw an opportunity, a house, late night and just took it. There are reports of suspicious activity in the area that night, possible sightings, maybe like a van, but nothing that ever fully connected. Nothing that explains all of it. Or like all three girls either. Every explanation answers one question, but it creates another. So I'm going to talk about some of the suspects that have been considered over time. Unfortunately, none of them stick, but the first was Dustin Rekla. He was a former boyfriend of Susie. He had broken into a Springfield mausoleum a few months before the women vanished and stole $30 worth of gold fillings from a skull. Okay, but also like kidnapping 3 women feels different than stealing $30 worth of stuff. But police considered Rekla because Susie had given investigators a statement about the mausoleum break-in and was rumored to be a probable witness against him in court. Rekla and 2 of his friends that helped in the mausoleum robbery were known to be together and in the area the night women went missing. Like I said, though, that's a pretty strong leap from stealing some gold from a local museum to kidnapping and getting rid of 3 women. But, especially for a high schooler. I'm not saying a high schooler couldn't do that, but the next suspect that they had at one point was Larry Dwayne Hall. He is a suspected serial killer who traveled around the Midwest for historical reenactments of Civil War. And he's believed to have abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered dozens of girls and women. Wilson's Creek National Battlefield is located about 25 minutes from Janelle's residence. There also happened to be 2 battle reenactments in the morning and afternoon of June 6th, 1992 in Pleasant Hope, Missouri, so about 30 minutes from Springfield. Also, something is super eerie about a Civil War reenactor murdering and assaulting people. I don't know what that is. After Hall was arrested, though, a former FBI operative, Jimmy Keene, was tasked with befriending him in prison and gaining his trust. Hall admitted to specific details about many of his crimes and murders in graphic detail to Keene that no one but the killer could have known. Hall also had an alleged map with locations of his victims after befriending Keene. Keene eventually revealed his identity to Hall, and he claims he saw 5 locations on Hall's alleged map in central and southern Missouri before Hall hid the map after Keene revealed his identity. Hall then refused to share any information on his past after encountering Keene, and nearly all of Hall's accused murders occurred in the months of March, June, August, and September between 1980 and 1994, which would correlate with Hall's, like the times that Hall is doing reenactments, and also obviously with this murder. Well, we don't know it's a murder, I guess, with this disappearance, but he was never officially accused of this crime. In 1997, Robert Craig Cox, imprisoned in Texas as a convicted kidnapper and robber, and the suspect in a Florida murder, told journalists that he knew the 3 women had been murdered and buried and claimed that their bodies would never be recovered. In 1992, Cox had been living in Springfield and, when interviewed then, told investigators that he was with his girlfriend at church in the morning after the women disappeared, which she corroborated at first. However, she later recanted her statement and said that Cox had asked her to say that. Cox also stated that he was at his parents' home the night of the disappearance, and they confirmed that alibi. But of course, it's his parents, so. Authorities were uncertain if Cox was involved in the case or if he was seeking recognition for the alleged murders by using false statements. So was he just trying to get some clout from this? Some weird clout. I mean, murderers would like that, but normal people, obviously, no. Cox stated to authorities and journalists he would disclose what happened to the 3 women after his mother died. Finally, the last viable suspect, I suppose, was Gerald Carnahan. He is a strong suspect among many, but he would be convicted for the 1985 rape and murder of Jackie Johns. The conviction would take place about 15 years later. So Carnahan which means he was free that whole time, so he could have been doing other things, obviously. Carnahan had numerous convictions, including an attempted abduction of another young woman years after John's murder. Carnahan also had ties with the Galloping Goose motorcycle gang, which I need to deep dive that alone. The Galloping Goose. I mean, come on. But apparently this motorcycle gang had rumors to have ties to this case in particular through the connection to a member named Stephen Garrison, a convicted rapist who police stated gave credible information related to the 3 missing women. Both Garrison and Carnahan are currently serving prison sentences for other crimes, so that's probably good that they're locked up anyways. But, like I said, none of these have ever been determined to be the person who did something with these women, but all have some suspicious ties. Also, why are there so many convicted murders and rapists in the Springfield, Missouri area at that time? Which is just scary. They're everywhere. So kind of circling back, so on December 31st, 1992, so this would have been about 6 months after the girls disappeared, a man had called the America's Most Wanted hotline with information about the women's disappearance, but unfortunately, the call was disconnected when the switchboard operator attempted to link up with Springfield investigators. Police said the caller had prime knowledge of the abductions and publicly appealed the man to contact them again, but unfortunately, he never did. Susie and Cheryl were declared legally dead in 1997, so about 5 years after their disappearance. However, their case files are still officially under missing. Investigators received a tip that the women's bodies were buried in the foundations of a parking garage at a hospital. In 2007, crime reporter Kathy Baird invited another mechanical engineer to kind of scan around the parking garage with ground-penetrating radar. And they found some anomalies, roughly the same size, 3 anomalies, and he said they were consistent with a gravesite location. However, the Springfield Police Department spokesperson said they believed there was no evidence or logical reasoning behind that theory at the time, and also the garage had been under construction in September of 1993, so over a year after the disappearances, so that wouldn't make sense, that concrete would have been, being put down at that point since it was so much later than when they went missing. And then Daryl Moore, a former assistant at the Greene County Prosecutor's Office, said a tip came in from someone who either claimed to be a psychic or claimed to have a dream or vision about the case. So this is really where the case settles in. 3 people don't just disappear quietly from the same place. Not without something going wrong. Not without someone noticing. Not without leaving something behind that clearly points to what happened. And yet, in this case, they didn't. Or if they did, it was missed, overlooked, or erased before it could matter. The house stayed exactly how they left it, their belongings still in place, their plans unfinished. Like whatever happened was supposed to be temporary, a moment. Something they expected to come back from, and they never did. This case remains unsolved as of 2026, in spite of upwards of 5,000 tips from the public. In June 1997, a bench was dedicated to the women inside the Victims' Memorial Garden in Springfield's Phelps Grove Park. This case has had a lot of publicity. It's been featured on shows such as 48 Hours, America's Most Wanted. Investigative Discovery aired The Springfield 3 on its Disappeared TV series. And in 2019, the same channel's People Magazine Investigates featured a tabloid-style episode titled The Springfield 3. Also, in 2021, a journalist, Anne Rodriguez Jones, I might be saying that wrong, launched the Springfield 3, a small town disappearance podcast. So definitely check that podcast out as well if you are interested in getting a deeper dive into it. If you have information related to this case, you're encouraged to contact authorities in Springfield, Missouri. And if you're listening to this, just remember, sometimes the most unsettling cases aren't the ones with obvious violence. They're the ones where everything looks normal until you realize it isn't. Thanks for listening to Kat Has Questions. If you liked this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who loves a good spiral. See you next week.